Welcome to Innovating with Scott Amyx. I'm your host, Scott, and today I'm joined by Greg Spillane, who is the CEO of Fancy. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. It's great to be here.
All right. So you played Division I sports, specifically, I believe, football at San Diego State University. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
All right. So what did you love about the sport, and what did you hate about the sport, and why did you choose to go into business instead of continuing your passion in football?
Well, sports have a way to make the decision for you when it's time to stop playing. So yeah, I mean, I think we all had the dreams, and I had the dream of playing, NFL football and doing that thing, on Sundays. But even the best of the best are only going to play for so many years when they get done. No, I mean, I think what football did is it really prepared me well for the business world. I think the one thing about athletics in general that carries over great in the business world and things that I take to this day is just the meritocracy nature of it. Right? There's nothing entitled, especially at sports at that level. The best players are going to play. And, if you're not willing to work hard and you're not willing to do the things that you need to do in order to be prepared for a game, it's going to show up when you play those games. And I think the same can be said for business. So for me, when I was done with my athletic career, it was a great experience for me. Business was really a natural evolution for me. I mean, a lot of the same things that I think allowed me to be successful in sports, carried over and has allowed me to do well in the business world.
Yeah, I think some of the things that you mentioned in your prior writings or interviews is that you perceive the business world as a form of competition,
That's
and
right.
I'm curious to understand what does that really mean, and then is there necessarily hostile kind of a approach to sports, or is it really more the fact that it is very merit based, and therefore if you're not doing the best and putting the most and being the most strategic, that you're going to be behind?
Yeah, I think definitely the latter. I don't really take a hostile approach to it, or I don't look at it as competition as my enemy and everything I can do to defeat my enemy. I look at it more from a competition perspective of if you're comparing it to the athletic side of it is, when you're on a team, and I was always a team sport guy, you have a group of people that becomes your, band of brothers, and you all have this goal of what you're looking to do. And in sports, it's obviously win a championship, but in business, it's, to reach a certain level or to hit certain milestones or objectives, or, ultimately build a successful company. And in the world we've lived in, a company that's eventually acquired and have some type of exit. And then, it's similar to sports where it's like your teammates all have their individual roles and you're all working together to meet that goal. That's how I look at it from a business perspective, right? We have a team of people. You're hiring different people from different backgrounds, different skill sets. But at the end of the day, we're all working together to kind of reach that goal. And then along the way, there are these sort of things that you have to overcome, right? I mean, look at what we're dealing with today. I mean, there's global issues that come up. There's competition that comes up. There's changes that are occurring. We're always trying to stay ahead of the competition. We're trying to innovate. We're trying to understand our customers. And from that perspective, that's where really the competition comes from. Like, how do we work together as a team in order to reach this goal that we're setting as a company?
Yeah, it's an interesting philosophy because sometimes it also requires making some tough decisions, right? So putting some people on the second string, putting people on
Mm-hmm.
the bench, or replacement altogether. What do you think about kind of the team dynamics, and how do you know that you have the best team for that particular season?
Oh man, that's a good question. And we used to always joke a little bit about that. Not necessarily joke lightheartedly, but like talk about it where you talk about being a family as a company, and the thing with being a family is it's unconditional love. But when you think about it as being a sports team, you realize that truly love's not unconditional. You love your people, you want the best for them, you're coming together, you're working together. But the same way, if the Yankees second baseman, isn't getting the job done, they're going to make a change and they're going to bring in somebody else that can do the job. And I think you have to take business in a similar type of perspective where you're constantly evaluating your team. You're constantly making sure that the right people are in the right positions. And there are times you got to make very difficult decisions, which are never fun to do. But, I think that if you set the culture up front with your organization, and, we used to always say culture is going to be determined by who you hire, who you fire, and who you promote. If your team starts to see the reason why you're making a decision where someone maybe no longer is going to be in the position they were in the past, or maybe no longer with the company, if they understand what those expectations are and understand the reasons behind it, and if they see the people who are doing the right things, that they're working hard, they're innovative, they're treating the customers the right way, whatever, and those are the people that are being promoted or getting those new opportunities, the team understands. And I think that that's how you sort of create that culture of being exceptional with your team.
All right. So let's get into your startup, Fancy. It's a very intriguing business because it is different from other online retailers. So if you could kind of describe what makes it so different, and then we'll get into some of the granularity.
Yeah, sure. So Fancy's been around for a little while. We were founded in 2009. At our core, Fancy's always been a place for people to come find extraordinary lifestyle products. Really founded more as almost a social network, kind of a Pinterest type of place where it was social curation, where people would come and they would post pictures of different products or experiences that they thought were special, and it allowed people to create sort of their aspirational profile of the different things that they liked and enjoyed. And then, over time, we've evolved into a global marketplace. So right now we run a global marketplace at scale. We work with, several hundred merchants, several 100,000 products across the globe. We have about 1 million people a month that come to Fancy looking to discover really interesting, curated lifestyle products from brands and artisans across the world. And the social component's still a big part of it. People come to Fancy, they scroll through things that they like, things that they share. Our algorithms are able to see what those things are, and then improves the experience for the next person coming to the site, so that they're finding things that are interesting and new and unique. And these are all products that you're not going to find on your traditional marketplaces, right? The Amazons of the world are great for transactional products. If you know exactly what you're looking for, you can go to Amazon, you can do a search, you can see a lot of different options in that. But Fancy's a place where you go, where you find things that you may not even have known existed, that are different, that your friends probably don't have or haven't seen in the past, and they're going to really help you demonstrate who you are as an individual and stand out from the crowd.
All right, so you're starting to kind of get into the demographics and social graph a little bit about the kinds of personas that come to your site. Can you go a little bit deeper in terms of who are they? Sounds like they are aspirational, but are they necessarily in the high net worth, ultra high net worth segment, or are they really more desiring to be that kind of unique and stand out?
Yeah, from a pure just looking at demographics, it's a pretty straightforward group. 75% of our customers are between 25 and 45. We're like 51% female, 49% male. Global perspective, we're about 30% of our customers actually happen outside of North America, big presence in Europe, Middle East, Asia, etc. Demographics are on the higher end of it from a socioeconomic perspective. I think our average income is around $88,000 a year. So it's a little bit of a higher end type of product. But what we really find is people enjoy about Fancy is the lifestyle aspect of it in general. It's not something that you can just simply see in a cohort analysis, but we see it as we do our own kind of customer surveys, and we look at what social media and who's interacting and who's engaging with what. People like the number one, just the pleasant experience of going on Fancy and seeing all these really interesting products. We use imagery very extensively within our product. You'll notice that you're not going to open up Fancy and just see a bunch of products with a white background like you see on a lot of e-commerce sites. We use great imagery, lifestyle imagery, and we create that experience. And then we find out the people who are really loyal to Fancy and come back to Fancy are those types of people who want to have a little fun with life, right? Anybody can buy functional products that are in their day-to-day lives. What we do is we try to take those functional products and we try to bring ones that spark a little bit more joy in sort of the everyday, um, person's life.
Yeah, I'm sure the kinds of needs are going to vary widely. But with that said, I think the design component, the kind of the artisan aspect, but
Yeah.
also this notion of some of these potential personas are kind of self-perceive themselves as centers of influence, meaning that they want to curate things that's unique so that they can, in fact, actually show off to their social networks. Kind of what I'm just trying to get a sense in terms of kind of the mental framework of some of your customers.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. Fancy from its very core, prior to introducing actual commerce, and commerce happened organically. Commerce happened when we had customers and we had users who were using fancy religiously, and was finding amazing products, and they were coming to us wanting to know how they could buy those products. And then that evolution happened. But the genesis of Fancy was a place for people to come and share products that they thought were interesting, and then create profiles. And we still have a very strong social aspect to Fancy right now. I mean, if you would join Fancy, you'd have your own profile as you fancy different products. That's kind of our term for like. You build your own profile that exists. And a lot of people were using that as their way of sort of expressing who they were in the world. These are the type of things that I like. These are the type of things
Mm.
that I enjoy. And then as we've moved into the commerce side of it, it's absolutely played out. We find some of our most loyal customers, and the things that they are buying are just individual products that express who they are, that serve a function that's practical in a lot of ways, but is different and unique, that allows them to stand out from sort of the rest.
So if you could talk a little bit about the product curation. So, the Genesis, it was kind of that Pinterest type of a social experience.
Mhm.
But now I'm sure there's a kind of an internal vetting process to determine what's going to actually make the cut onto Fancy. And how do you know before you actually put it on there that the customers are going to love it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do have a team of people who vet out every merchant and every product that comes onto the site. That's evolved over time. There was a time where Fancy was sort of a free for all, and anybody could put anything on the site. But we've had to close that down a little bit. Just as we've moved into commerce, you want to make sure that you're protecting against the experience of the buyer, and make sure that every single seller on our platform has been vetted and is reliable and has a real business is going to fulfill, and all those types of things. So we have a team of people who are looking externally. They spend their time reaching out to different brands and different products that they've come across that they think that would be interesting and unique and interesting. And then we have a lot of inbound uh, demands from people who know Fancy, see Fancy as a place that it's always been kind of the coolest, most interesting stuff. They have a product or a brand that they want to go after that kind of lifestyle market, or that clientele, and they'll reach out to us. So we'll take that first level of vetting process that comes into play. And then when we do go live with the product, we rely heavily on interactions from our users. So the way the Fancy experience still works is if you open up our app, and we have it's like 2.6 million live installs of the Fancy app on iOS and Android, and over a million users a month that open up the app and interact. You have a scroll and you have a feed of different products that we're constantly showing you, and based on how people interact with those products, we're able to see what people are liking and what people don't like. Now, we may not take a product off of our platform that doesn't get a lot of interactions or shares or fancies or sales, but the products that you are going to see are typically going to be the products that other people are interacting with. And then, based on the algorithms, people who have similar tastes to you in the past, you're going to have similar feeds to things that they've liked when you open up the platform on a daily basis.
So let's talk a little bit about your career as well as your role in Fancy. So you've been involved in quite a bit of turnarounds, and you were specifically
Yeah.
brought into Fancy for a purpose. What was Fancy before you came in, and what are some of the things that you can share that you've instituted into the organization since you joined?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, that's fair. So for anybody, listener watching, I didn't found Fancy. I was brought in early 2019 to take over the company from the original founders. And I when I came in, there were obviously some issues that had occurred. Most of those issues were probably attributed more to lack of focus than anything. Maybe there was a little bit of founders fatigue that was happening. Maybe there was a desire to try to do some different things. When I came in, it wasn't really about making drastic changes as much as it was refocusing back on the core of the platform. When I came, there was a lot of offline businesses that had been spun up over the years, probably just as Fancy was successful. They had raised a lot of money. They were having a lot of success, so they were trying different things. And, they had a logistics business that they were trying to market out. They had retail locations. They were doing, external promotions. They had a marketing arm of the company where they were out trying to sell marketing. They were out competing in a software world, trying to go up against Shopify. And we have amazing technology, and we were actually licensing our technology out to, other companies that were using it. And although they were having success in all these different areas, it was very difficult for them to execute on all these fronts and execute well. So one of the things that I did when I joined the company is really look at the core assets of what we had, where the opportunity existed, where we were special, and where we could win and compete in a global economy. And it was getting back to what Fancy had always been, which is a platform for amazing brands and retailers and artisans to be able to showcase their products, and a place where consumers, whether through the fancy.com website or through our mobile apps, can find and discover and interact with these great, amazing products. So really it was more a simplification versus trying to do more. It was just cutting out some of the noise and getting back to what the core focus of the organization had always been.
Yeah, I think when we sometimes think about innovation, we always think about in terms of new product extension, new product developments. But innovation also exists in the context of divestitures, trimming down, and focusing in
Mm-hmm.
terms of your product portfolio. Can you give one or two examples of how did you innovate by focusing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that plays into just sort of what I was just talking about, right? We were doing a lot of different things, and when you're not a big team and you're trying to do a lot of different things, there's rarely are you going to be able to do anything really, really well. So as we sat back and we looked at sort of the evolution of Fancy and where we wanted to be, we wanted to be this amazing destination to discover cool, interesting products from artisans that you may not have seen in the past. And I think one of the things that we also did is realize who our core customer is. We had a really wide range of products that would appeal to maybe the hip hop scene in New York City, as well as the suburban moms and dads. And for us, it was really better understanding our customer, better understanding who we wanted to be, better understanding the purpose of why Fancy exists in this world. And as we've simplified and we've cut out some of those external businesses, I think where the evolution or the innovation of Fancy has come is better understanding who we are. And as we've better understood who we are and who we want to be and who our target customers and what they want, et cetera, we've been able to make the experience better and better and more focused. And we've seen that with increased engagement across the platform.
Yeah, I think that was some of the questions I was getting at earlier is that there is kind of a wide spectrum of different personas that will come to visit your site.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to distill it down to that one or two that really represents the core DNA of what Fancy stands for, and that all the gears and cogs are basically pointed towards that direction. So in that regard, how is that translated into either product or marketing kind of focus and let's call it more generically innovation?
Yeah. So, when I joined over the last, gosh, it's only been, 13 months since I joined the company. There was a lot of cleanup and turnaround that was necessary just from a bigger picture. As I talked about some different business units that we needed to divest, restructuring some of the team, bringing in different people for different specific roles, etc. And then, as we were able to really dig into the data, we saw a number of friction points in regards to how people were interacting with the platform. We had some great engagement. The number of people that still opened up the Fancy app and stillwenttofancy.com was really high. But because I think of what you mentioned and not truly understanding, the persona we were going after and maybe trying to go after too many personas at the same time, I think it was confusing people, and we weren't converting at the rate that I would have liked to have converted from a business perspective. So there's been a lot of cleanup over the last, however many months, focusing on, what type of products do we want on the site? What type of products don't we want on the site? Making the experience as clean as it can be. There's been a lot of technical changes that we've done, a redesign of the UX and the mobile app, a lot of changes on the web. We're constantly making those changes. We're redoing our navigation structure, sort of the categorization of all of our products, eliminating certain product categories that we just don't seem to be a great fit. And now we're really in a situation where that part's in place, and we really just started kicking off, going back out and trying to do new customer acquisition. We've been lucky, and we're fortunate enough that we have this user base and a loyal user base that continues to come to Fancy and finds us through organic methods that we haven't had to invest much in growth to this perspective, other than just make the experience better for our existing users. But now we're just really starting to kick off and going out and taking some of these different changes and bringing it to a wider audience who may not have been familiar with Fancy in the past.
Yeah, I want to go back to the beginning when we were talking about sports and just kind of wrap this up in a sports narrative. Is that you've took over this franchise that was doing well. So when we think about a great sports team, it was a great sports team to begin with, but you've had to make some hard decisions. Like we talked about at the onset, is it requires reshuffling the team composition. Definitely looking at the playbook and saying, look, this strategy may have worked in the past, but we need to really focus on what we do best. Are we better at running? Are we better at passing? And looking at the measurements, and then also the fans. I mean, yes, you got a huge fan base, but who's really paying? Who's really, not just paying for the admission ticket, but purchasing the other, complimentary and just, their APRU are just much higher. So that focus and just rebranding and refocusing on that franchise and saying, we're going to be the best that we can possibly be. I think that's a terrific story. So the last question I have for you is, when you look at your span of all the organizations that you've been involved with and products that you've launched, can you give an example of a product failure and the lessons learned from that other entrepreneurs can learn from your experience?
Oh, man. Product failure. Look, I think business is just a long string of failures until you find some successes. I think you have to be comfortable with that in general. And I know that's kind of a cliche to say, but I think it's the truth. I've been lucky enough that I haven't had any catastrophic failures, because I think what I've been willing to do is adjust and iterate quickly. And I think that that's absolutely important as you go through this. So look, we all have ideas. We all have hypotheses. We all try different things, and they mostly don't work. But it's how quickly you're able to adjust as you go along the way. So, they talk a lot about agile development in software. And we know that, agile has kind of replaced, waterfall, because you were able to sort of do development on these 2-week sprints, and you're able to iterate, and you're able to keep up with customer demands. And, it's really difficult to know what your customer is going to want and build something that's going to take 18 months, and then you roll it out and you're going to realize you completely missed the mark. And I think that can be applied in general to product development or innovation of any sort. You have a hypothesis, you have a theory of what you think is going to work, or what the market needs or the market wants, and you're going to start working towards that. But you constantly have to be looking at what the market's doing and how it's changing and how the work that you're doing is being responded to. And you can't be afraid to make little deviations along the way. And you may think you're going to go in one direction, but you end up somewhere else. And I think that if you sort of follow that approach, it'll minimize, a catastrophic failure that can potentially happen. As far as just a mistake, I mean, if I was going to try to, talk about maybe the biggest lessons learned that I've kind of come across, my biggest scar, is when I first started, and I don't know how I've kind of become this turnaround guy. It sort of happened sort of randomly, but since then I have come in and I've won several different turnarounds. And having gone to business school, I think early on in my career, I ran these turnarounds like almost like a business case, right? Like, here's a scenario, here's what our customers are doing, here's what the competition's doing, here's what the business looks like. Okay, it's obvious we need to cut these divisions, we need to refocus all of our efforts over in this direction. This is where the product innovation needs to happen, right? It's like you kind of can map it out of what you need to do. And what I didn't do a good job of was dealing with the people and realizing that at the end of the day, the company is just a group of people. And those people got families and friends and aspirations and dreams and emotions and all those different types of things. And I would make difficult decisions that would impact people's lives, whether it was, like you said, maybe someone isn't a starter and they had to move to the second string, right? Like, yeah, that might have been the best decision from a business perspective, but like, how does that affect that person's morale? Or you have to make cuts, and maybe not being as empathetic as I needed to be when I made those cuts, and thinking about how that actually impacted the people who were left behind, who that was a friend of theirs. And you kind of lose your team. You can have the right strategy and you're doing the right things and the right business decisions, but if your team doesn't trust you and they don't rally behind you and they don't believe in you, it doesn't really matter. And I think that the one lesson learned that now I do a much better job of later in my career is really just the true empathy involved with understanding that your people are the most important thing in your entire company, and every decision has to be made sort of with how it impacts them. And you're still going to have to make those really tough decisions, but you got to make those tough decisions in the most empathetic ways possible. And you got to make sure that as you're making those decisions, you're considering what the aspirations and the dreams and sort of the goals of the people that you have in your company are, so that they still feel aligned with the direction that the company's going.
Terrific advice and insight. So on that note, I've been joined by Greg Spillane, who is the CEO of Fancy. Thanks for joining today.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Scott.